Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 926 of the Heidegger series. And finally sunshine has come in once more after a whole week of rain, cloudiness and coldness. It is a wonderful day. It feels like something we in Swedish call försommar, pre-summer. But I would say it's more akin to, could I say it more akin to? Well, here it's definitely spring and nothing else. Nothing more and nothing less than spring. But that's not bad, to be honest. I hope the wind won't cause any deduction of the sound quality. I wish the camera was a bit higher up. Nothing to do, nothing to see. I've been talking earlier on about the part and the whole, and that there is a division made there. And this division, of course, as all divisions, makes something prioritized and another thing marginalized. Usually in the case here, can also be the reversed, but usually it's the little thing that is the prioritized, and it is being defined with a big thing, what is around it, the negative space. And as we have learned from quantum mechanics and deconstruction, by taking away one part, we also take away the part that we want to keep. That is, of course, the metaphysics of presence in a nutshell. Focusing on one thing solely doesn't blocks the access even to the thing that we are in want of. The partitionings apply to all parts of the world, and not only is that a sort of a commandment, it is an absolute must. Otherwise it will not be deconstruction. But let's today call it a rule of thumb. If you want to have distinctiveness, if you want to have small parts, you need to take in the whole. Otherwise the path to the small will not be possible. This could also be called complementarity, where access to the world cannot be made by seeing the world just like waves, neither in its absolute contradiction, particle. Both are absolutely needed to make each and every one shine through, as well as the wholeness. This is also the Chatuskoti. To have all the four corners, they must all be accepted and contradicted at the very same time. That was the message from Nagarjuna. It's a little bit, if you want to understand wholeness, you have to give up the search for presence. Otherwise that stuckness, that fixation of the focal setting won't let you have anything in the end. So let me give you an extreme example. Even if you want to, as a social anthropologist, get in closer to what a tribe in the Amazon do, you have to get into what is the matter with your own family, how you are connected to the rest of your neighbors, your friendship, your circle of friendship, how you handle your emotions, your inner life, your economy even, and what your pastime interests are. All those things come into the picture to be more distinct about your appreciation, your perception of the Amazon Indians. This is one of the most persistent divisions, the whole and the parts, and the idea of actually in every waking moment take away what surrounds you, in the idea that by focusing, in this case, on the camera, I get more on the camera, I can get more details, I can have a talking line, I can have a conclusion, I will gain clarity. All that is false. All that can only be achieved by taking in the whole. And we discussed earlier about something called connectivism, and of course in some aspect it is connectivism, but the problem was already always established beforehand, already by starting with the ontic movement. Everything that came later was a consequence of that. So instead of using connectivism to reinforce all the connections, we have to go before and undo the fixation, the focal setting of only one way of seeing the world and you together, and see that this is a flexible connection, always flexible, and it's the very flexibility that gives reality. It's not something out there, it's not something strictly in there, it is the flexibility of the focal setting. And the ontic move, it's a move against the focal setting. It's the idea that the change in focal setting is impossible. This is also, as we mentioned many times before, the working of the Klein-bottle logic. A logic that shows that the little in the subjective, if that's the case, implies the bigness in the objective. And that can be seen directly in the Klein bottle, where the snout goes in and interpenetrates into the volume, making container and volume to be the same at some instant and then radically different at other instants. So you get three new ways of being. Radical inside, that is completely not connected to anything else. Radical outside, not connected to anything else. And the absolute connectedness, the complementarity, them being the same thing. And in the ordinary worldview, it is a rather loose outside, a rather loose inside. They get mumbled up, jumbled up, not very clear what is outside and what is inside, and they are most definitely not connected. This is not the way of the pseudo deconstructivist of Oregon, especially Greenboro State University, where they try in a very coarse way to turn the social hierarchy upside down. And this is the heritage already from the French Revolution. The idea that you can isolate a class, a sexual orientation from the rest of the world, and you can all of a sudden prioritize that, and then you construct equality, freedom, and justice by isolating one part from the whole. The isolation process in itself is the problem. So what happens? What do we do? Well, for instance, in this case, it's a lot of, especially in Greenboro State University, is that one isolate women as a gender group or something like that, try to reverse the prospect by isolating them, and thereby they lose their position in the whole. They cannot any longer access the whole and the space around it. The radical otherness becomes a lesser part. So if we assume, as in the Frames Revolution, women were seen as lower or were lower in the social construction, by taking them out won't cure anything. We just take them out from a position of having something of an order, something of an influence, and making that influence non-existent or not open to vision. Oddly enough, the bad things still linger on. We are still a part of the world, and the dominating power will still exert its force on women. But in this case, it's no longer collective. It's no longer an oppression part of tradition or history. Now every woman has to make their own battle in every situation. They are casted out to the angry dogs, and it becomes a flight and fight response of the whole thing. All of a sudden, the security in the position is gone. Only the bad stuff is still there, because you're still a part of the whole, just giving up the positive aspects, the acknowledgement you did have. And to make it even worse, every woman has to bear that individually all of a sudden. She cannot get any loosening up by understanding this is my position or the tradition has been so. Those helping understandings are no longer there. So she's led to frustration, and we in the end say that's the woman's own fault. We isolate it and we send her to the therapist. This is without a doubt reasons for neurosis being more common in women today than in men, and that depression is 3 times more as prevalent, and burnout syndrome twice as much. They are left to their own doing now. It's a cruelness not having access to the whole anymore, and the negative aspects are still there. You cannot literally take yourself out of the world. You can take your perception of being into the world away. Wholly on a subjective level, you can be able to block that out. But your connectedness, that is something you can never take away. So you will still be utterly defined. You will just be led into a higher degree of subjectivity. And this is, of course, the explosion of the ego. The ego gets much bigger in the 20th century. We become more individualistic, but in reality we become less of individuals and more of egos. And egos in that sense that we become weak. We're giving up the bonus of being in a system, that chaotic system that gives resilience and stability. Instead, we go down to a lower grade, and to get some satisfaction, metaphysics of presence lead us to rename things. And this renaming process that always acknowledges lack and sameness is what's left. So you can no longer change your life as was earlier possible. You can only rename the thing. Renaming is part and parcel of modernity. It's an adding of concepts, changing of concepts, and reversal of concepts. It's all on a rather superficial, lower level. It doesn't have much of stability. The strange attractor is not that active. And the opaqueness, the darkness that covers the knowing that was before the French Revolution, before women's lib and such things, makes it impossible to question the new order. The new order, modernity, cannot be questioned. Earlier we could question because we were aware. We have not made the division between the particular and the wholeness. That division blocks out knowledge, blocks out understanding. In the same way as the ego is not something substantial, it is a blockage of awareness. It's a literal blockage in the sense that you slump down. Your eyes narrow, your vision narrow, you don't take in the whole anymore. You become narrow body, mind and soul. And this narrowing makes it impossible to understand your own position. You are positionless. And in the same way, we earlier mentioned that not being localized in space makes for fear, because then you don't know where you can go. And in time, the lack of localization that is obvious today makes it impossible to plan and also to access the past, your own past, that makes up what you are. The lack of localization in knowledge is caused by this division, random division between the whole and the particular. Maybe in this case, the previous position that women had in society, the knowledge that had been gained through centuries is changed to nothing. This nothing is the blockage and will lead to only concepts. We can no longer get comfort, no longer can we get knowledge, how to act, how to plan. You become a little black spot, like the blind spot in your eye, where there is no vision. That part of the visual field where there is nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that's the ego. And this is this new liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. Things gets personalized and we say that women themselves are to blame, or they blame themselves for their depressions and their burnout syndrome, because now they are genuinely alone. Alone by a process that started randomly and whose effects are absolutely random. So what was earlier sort of social hierarchy that put women in a low position, they could still hack it. But now that low position takes a toll in a completely different way. So each and every one gets a mark or a scar, bodily taken and psychologically taken. And that is that woman's own burden, her individual fate. And of course, underneath this is a blame. She caused it to herself. So this is a turning upside down of all values. And there's no wonder that the idea of modernity as the complete lack of any moral is absolutely true. This is, of course, randomness at work. And what is immorality if not randomness? What else could it be? And once they have to change their presence, their awareness, their true self to the ego, they also become much less self-confident, strong. It's a lower way of a chaotic system to be, a lower strange attractor. It has its own pull, but it pulls the person down. And it's this weakness you get very influenced by others. So the others, this dark, unknown entity, becomes the deciding factors what you think about the world. And that will block out your body even more. And you will stop sensing less and less and less. It has become truly inaccessible to knowledge. The ego is always a weak character, and it's constantly taking its energy from others, its concepts, its renaming strategy. And let me remind you, this is not an opinion that is part of a political debate. It's just seeing how you can put deconstruction into the larger matter of things, how you can see it controlling us when it's not, well, how the metaphysics of present can control us as long as we are not aware of it. And it also shows us that we can heal this. I do like what Robert Magliola writes in the book Derrida on the Mend. I forgot the page now, but it's somewhere mid-term, like 130, 150, somewhere there in that vicinity. We can always heal these divisions. History is not lost to us. Still, we can turn to knowledge instead of conceptualizations or renaming processes. We can stop the surge for looking for the original presence that is the lure, the promise of the French Revolution, of liberté, égalité, fraternité, which is just a logocentrism of presence. Instead, we can find us to inhabit time and history once more, and we can live knowledge and find these things that kept life going once upon a time. And what I think is particularly odd is when people try to understand former times, like the 16th century, that is my favorite, the Renaissance time. They use their own subjective now, how they feel today in modern times, trying to understand the people living then. Although that is correct in some sense, that makes the idea that they just lacked things we have today. But it is far from true. Their chaotic system was much more resilient than us. Their access to enjoyment, presence, being, was at a much greater level. This is something that Ian McGilchrist began to show in his book, The Master and His Emperor. But now in his new book, he's gone even further into that, to showing the subjective experience was completely different in the 16th century. And that is the only thing that matters. The other ones are sort of ego things, characteristics put by the ego that are highly emotional, not valid for a larger context, like how much wealth did they have, how much health did they have. It's nonsensical to use that metric on human beings that are actually living, feeling, existing. It's a sort of nonsense. It is sheer ignorance, as Ian McGilchrist describes it. Sheer ignorance. It is completely obvious that we don't get stronger by isolating us from society. We come to lack all the resilience the greater chaotic system that is society, or rather the world, is. And we make divisions between ourselves and of what we think is interior. And this is also something can be likened to the language game of Wittgenstein. And by deserting where the language game is made, where it takes its force, we all keep our own individual box today. And instead of a beetle, we have in that little box our own individual, completely subjective, not shared by anyone, conception of equality, justice, and freedom. No longer is freedom something exogenous out there in the world. No longer is equality or rights something you can actually experience. It's part of the beetle box. And everyone has their own meaning. They can't even understand what they have or not have, because private language is an impossibility. So you can say that you have freedom, you can say that you have gained greater individuality, but you can't know it, because you lost the touch to the exogenous part that is important to have meaning in your language. Instead, you are pointing to the box and saying, I have something here and I can't even know what it is. I lack the exogenous, is another way of saying it. And this is of course what Wittgenstein is pointing to, once more entering the exogenous and leaving the simulacra of Ian McGilchrist's description in his later book, The Matter with Things, going into reality and have independence that used to be the thing for women and all other groups that are today sort of, we're taking their chair away from them when they were trying to sit. So they only have the concepts to sort of fight back and get even violent, because violence is what erupted in Greenboro State University and many others of the universities in Oregon, Washington, which are the areas most highly affected by this new trend of physically reversing the order, whatever that means and whatever that makes. It only ends in violence and an establishment of that the stronger person is the one that has right. It's a horrific degradation of what it is to be a human being. And it's completely unnecessary, because knowledge can never ever go away. Even if we have that feeling sometimes, like Arthur Spengler and other people who saw in the rise of the new civilization the apocalypse of civilization itself. No, I don't agree on that. I don't agree on that dystopic view, also shared by Stephen M. Rosen. I think knowledge is round the corner, and a very effective deconstruction can heal human beings once more, can make us access knowledge, time and space, because there is a good reason for this metaphysics of presence. And giving it up is impossible, and it wouldn't even cure anything. We need to start with that impetus and let that lead us to something that can actually give us something. But trying to burn it out or seducing it like the French Revolution tried to do, it's an impossibility. Just makes the greed from the metaphysics of presence even more cumbersome, stronger, less likely to shut down. I'll say that's quite enough for today. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. I'll enjoy the sunshine at least for a couple of minutes. Have a good one. Bye bye.